All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Just because I know that lunch is coming at 12:30, you said, right? So is that clock correct at the back? I'm seeing a glare. I think it's 11:45. No, yeah, 11:45. Is that right?
It's close.
Okay. So last night you were asking if you weren't here last night. I think most of us were, but we talked about nurturing, how nurturing can bring peace, and the idea of feeding, not even physical feeding, but just the idea of what nurturing is, like nourishing, and it's, bringing up, and fattening, even the word fattening, just making healthy, and how that applies to our husbands and our children, and how it helps our families be more at peace, which really has an idea of being whole and complete. The idea of peace is bringing wholeness and completeness, to yourself. And so that's what we talked about last night. We talked about all the different ways, physically, spiritually, and emotionally, that we do that as Christian women, and how it helps our families. Today we're talking, and a lot of times, when you start talking about, and they've already hinted at it over there in the auditorium, but a lot of times when you start talking to a bunch of women about things you need to do, and do this and do that, I'm sure you're like me. Sometimes you're like, that's just one more thing that I feel like I'm going to have to do. And I've already got too many things to do. It's making me a wreck, I feel overwhelmed all the time. I think that's pretty common for women to feel. I wish I knew why. I think we try to do a lot. We try to do too much sometimes. So finding that balance is important. And when we think about balance, I want you to keep in mind the idea of that old-timey balance, that you place some things on this side, other things on this side, and it teeters until you find that balance. So keep that in your mind. But also, let's think about, the Bible mentions balance, weights, and measures, especially in the Old Testament. And in Leviticus, ironically, we were just talking about Leviticus. One thing you can read in Leviticus is how that they should not have unfair balances and weights and measures. We won't read that verse, but it's Leviticus 19, 36 and 37. And in Proverbs, 2 different times, in chapter 20 and verse 10, and in chapter 11, verse 1, balances and weights and measures that were false or deceiving, it was an abomination to God. So why would that be? Think about how people used to do business. You bring in your grain from your land, and you bring this to this balance, and they measure it by their weights. A person in the market, they put all their weights on it until they say, well, you brought this much, this equals this much money that I'm going to give you. Well, it could be very easy to have false weights and make that not exactly be accurate, and then you're cheating someone. Well, God said stuff like that is an abomination here. Cheating and lying. And when I think about it, I think about how this false sense of what's important or the measure of something, we deal with that in our life even now. Sometimes it's hard. What makes balancing hard is that in our life, we have so many things that are placed on one side of that balance that we feel like, oh, that's so important, and I've got to really work on that. It makes it feel like this is valuable over here. And sometimes the devil is really good at making those things that aren't as important seem like they are so important, and they feel heavy, like we have to do this. If I don't do this, and then very often those truly important things that are way up here feeling really light and feathery, like, oh, well, that would be nice. We just talked about last night. We've mentioned even this morning about those spiritual things we need to think about. And so many times the reason we neglect them is because they just feel like they're not quite as heavy. Like some other things we have to figure out first. The devil is really good about making us feel that way. He's done it from the beginning. In the garden, when Eve was there, what did he messed with her balance a little bit. God had given them the perfect balance. They had a perfect place to live. They got to commune with God. They didn't even know the weight of sin at all. They were not familiar with it at all. And so the devil came in and tempted her and made her feel like she was missing out on something. Like he wanted her to feel like her balance is a little off. You need to be working on this, or you should be striving for this. He wanted her to try to have the knowledge of God, and feel like God had not been straight with her. And so he told her and lied to her and really gave her a false weight or measurement. I guess it's important for you to know what God knows. But God didn't want her to know what he knew. And so as soon as that happened, of course, her balance and the rest of the world's balance for all time to come has been thrown off because of that. So the devil's really good at doing this, and we need to acknowledge it. And when we look at our life and all the things we have to do, we really have to think about putting those things in the proper balance, not with his weights and measurements, not with the devil's, but with what God says. Okay, so let's think about Luke chapter 10. This idea of keeping things in perspective. You'll know this. Luke chapter 10 is the account of Mary and Martha. When Jesus was living, he had friends in this town called Bethany, Mary and Martha and their brother Lazarus. And they were good friends, and he would see them, and he loved them. But one time he's visiting, and he comes to their house. Now, when Jesus came to visit, I would feel pretty safe in saying this, he wasn't by himself. He probably had all of his disciples with him, and at least 12 men. I don't know if you've ever cooked for 12 hungry men, but that's a lot. But it probably wasn't only 12 men. There were usually women that followed them around. They may have had friends from their own little family or neighborhood that came over, because Jesus was a very popular person. And so she could have been preparing food for up to 20 to 30 people possibly. And so that would, imagine that. So let's just give Martha, there's a book called In Defense of Martha. It's about how we should not be just so quick to throw her under the bus that she was so. But the Bible says that when they came, Martha welcomed him, and she was distracted with much serving. And I know why. I know why. But she wasn't just distracted in trying to prepare this meal. She also let it get to her because she got mad at her sister Mary, because she was sitting listening to Jesus' teaching. And Martha, of course, thought, she should be in here helping me. Just imagine, And so she said to Jesus, which I used to think how audacious she was to go to Jesus and tell him to say, Mary, please go help your sister. But I think it also shows their relationship. I think she felt very friendly and comfortable with Jesus as a person and a friend. And she said, do you not see that she needs to be helping me? Can you tell her to come help me? And then what Jesus told Mary or Martha was that, I love how he says, let me read it. This is in verse 41 there in Luke chapter 10. He says, Martha, Martha. And I think repeating her name just shows his care and concern for her. Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things. But then he said, but one thing is necessary. And he said that Mary chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. So what exactly is he meaning there? Mary's listening to the words of Jesus. Martha's doing something good that was important and necessary to her, feeding people who came to her house. But Mary is taking part in those things that won't be taken from her. And when we're trying to balance that busy life, we have to remember that the necessary thing, there's one necessary thing, and it is the things that are spiritual and eternal. And when we're dealing with ourselves or with our husbands or with our children, we have to believe that there's one thing. And I think when we are talking about balance, we have to remember that we can try all day long to be balanced, but really at the end of the day, what we really have to remember is if we put those eternal things on the balance, there is nothing ever that could even move that as far as God's concerned. Nothing. Not one thing. Because your eternity, your husband's eternity, your children's eternity, anyone you come across, all of your friends and family, their eternity is so much more important than this little tiny life we're living that seems, because the devil really wants it to seem like this is huge now, the education of your children, and I'm an educator, so I'm saying a lot when I'm saying this, the education of your children is important, and, what people think about you in the community, that's really important, or even taking care of other people's physical needs can seem so important, but we can't do that to the point that we're neglecting spiritual things. So I want you to really remember that as we go through. So you want to be better at balancing. Let me give you some things you should be thinking about that might make this a little easier. One is we should remember perspective. And what I mean by that is usually you hear people talk about a season of life, right? We know what that means. You have a season of life, and we're just going to start like maybe with adulthood. Maybe you're single. You're not married yet, and you can do things at that stage of life that are going to look a lot different than what your season of life in a few years might look like. But then maybe the time comes when you're married and you're newlyweds. That looks different, of course, than other seasons of your life. When you have those children possibly coming along, that changes the season you're in. As they get a little bit older, that changes the season you're in. And then as they get even a little bit older, that season changes. Your whole life changes the way, and then of course as they, which I'm about to enter, is when you have children who are not at home anymore, but that's going to feel different. Things you can do change. Now it's hard sometimes to see the season that you're in, and a lot of times we're guilty, I think, we maybe try to live a season that we're really not in. We need to acknowledge where we're at and see what we can do, but we also don't need to compare what we're doing to what someone else can do. So when you're thinking about keeping balance, and especially spiritual things, that doesn't have to necessarily look the same as what somebody else is doing. It could change as your seasons change. What you can do for God changes. An example is this. When Adam and I, several years ago, during his first full-time ministry, he wanted to do a mentoring group at church. He was, we were in our 30s, but he wanted to mentor some guys that were in their 20s. We had a lot of that age group at church, and good guys, good families. But he thought, as the minister, that would be something they could talk about some important things about husbands, being a husband, being a father. They read some books and discussed them once a month or so, and so that turned out so well. A lot of those guys are now deacons in the church because I think, and I don't know, but I want to say that I think Adam had a little bit to do with just that spiritual growth that they went through. But I remember, of course, like Martha, feeling like I have these people coming to my house. So part of the deal was I was going to cook dinner. It was never, spaghetti, chicken pot pie, just little simple things like that. But, a lot of it. But I felt so important because I knew I was helping Adam. I just felt so important. But do you know what happens as your kids get older and then they're teenagers? We hardly ever are able to do anything like that anymore because there's so many other things going on. But now the people coming into our home, teenagers all the time. I mean, we have Teens in the Word that we started because we wanted our children to have a stronger youth group to be a part of. We felt like we could help them grow in their biblical knowledge. And so we started that. And even now with our youth minister, now he is in charge of that, but it's still at our house because they live in an apartment, and so now a couple of times a month that's who comes through my door, and I don't make dinner for them. That was my one step. Like somebody else, we will have volunteers bring the food when we do this, but you see what I mean? Like that changes because I was in a different season of life, and what I could do for Adam now needs to change about what thought we should do for our teenage children, and so it changes as you go. And so take an honest look and get some perspective about where you are, what you can do. What you can do is not what somebody else can do. Families are different. 1 Corinthians chapter 12 talks about the body of Christ. It paints that picture of, the head and the arms and the eyes and all of those different body parts, and how not one is more important than the other. That's true in your little family, but that's also true in the church family. So when you're looking at spiritual things that you want to do better in your season of life, it's okay that sister so-and-so over here is always the one that can do, maybe she's running the Bible school program and she's able to do this or do that. But maybe you feel like, well, maybe that new couple at church, maybe I could invite them over. We could have, hamburgers or something, But that's important. That's important because you're encouraging another young couple at church. You're building the camaraderie. I can't say that word. Camaraderie there between young families, and that's important. And that's part of you being a healthy part of the body. You look out for those visitors that come in who seem to have young kids, and you say, "Hey, why don't y'all sit with?" That's different than, and that's important, just as important as an older sister who's able to do, a lot more, maybe that it looks like she's doing a lot more. So that's what I mean. Keep things in perspective, and don't feel like you can't do something. Decide when you're making those goals that Adam mentioned. Let's think about where you are in life and what we can do together and what we can do for the church. And think about the tapestry. Have you ever heard the tapestry illustration? Where if you look at the back side of a tapestry, that is really messy. Have you ever seen one? Sometimes in an art gallery, with all the needlework that's there, the back of the tapestry is just ugly. And that's how life feels sometimes, right? It looks messy, it's ugly. We don't see the bigger picture of your life. But all these little steps that you try with whatever you can do, whenever you can do, one day, if that's your goal, is to really try to increase your spiritual work in your spiritual lives with you, your husband, and your children, you'll be able to turn around on the front side of that tapestry and see how beautiful those little things that you thought might not have been that big a deal. You can see that made a difference in our family, or that made a difference in the church family. So don't forget to think about that. Now, other things we need to think about is your purpose and priorities. That helps put things in balance too. What's your purpose? Things won't come together. Our life will not be what we want it to be if we don't have our purpose, if we don't know what our purpose is. Now, usually we know what our purpose is, even if we don't say it out loud. And this is where toes might get sore, okay? Mine included. So maybe your purpose and your family, and I'm going to use illustrations that have to do with raising children right now because this makes sense to me. But maybe your purpose is to have your kids be popular, and that's what you do. And whether or not you will say it, what you're doing is living to that purpose, right? I want them to be popular. I want the other kids around them to like them. So what we do, that's what I'm thinking first. All right, maybe you want your purpose is have athletic kids. Maybe you think that's important, and that's really whether you'll say it out loud, that's what you're trying to raise in your mind are athletic children. It could be that you want, maybe talented children in other ways, maybe music or art or something like that, that's where we put our time, that's what we talk about, that's what we do, that's where we put our money. And so that's what your purpose is, whether you'll say it out loud. And sometimes we want smart kids. We want them to do well in school. We're going to make sure they have every opportunity to grow in academics. And that's what we think about, where we spend our money. Maybe we just want good kids. So we're maybe really good at making sure that they are safe. We know all about the phones. We can take care of all that because, society is even saying that. Now we've got to be having good kids. Maybe as long as they don't engage in sex before marriage or do drugs, we feel like, hey, that's pretty good. And it is. But that's where it ends with us. We just want them to be good, stay out of trouble. That's what we put our time and effort into. But we should have our purposes raising faithful children. That should be the first thing we do. So if you don't know which one you're working toward, take a hard look. And this could apply to any family. Now I'm using these illustrations about children, but whatever you could put in anything like our purpose is to retire with this much money, or our purpose is to be influential in the community, or it could be anything like that. So, use your mind. Why do I keep doing this? I do this. I think it's the balance thing. I just keep doing this. I need to put my hands behind my back. So anyway, just think about your purpose and what you're working toward, and be honest. What do you spend your time doing? Where you spend your money? And that's a good indication of what your true purpose is. And then we need to get that balance and aligned right so that you can really work toward the most important purpose, like Jesus told Mary, the necessary thing. Now, most parents, I think, in the church really think that I think they would say that they're raising children who love and obey God, especially if they're bringing them to church. They want to believe that. I mean, I think we all would, if somebody asked us, we'd say, yeah, I want them to obey God. I want us, them to go to heaven one day. So, but a lot of times our daily choices are not really reflecting that. So what I mean is this, we might say, I want my children to be faithful in the church. I want them to remain faithful. That's so important to us. But their day-to-day choices allow the family's schedule to be more important than the church's schedule. And that's not really living toward that purpose of raising faithful children, because you need to be teaching them that the church's schedule should be more important than the school schedule. That's hard. That is really hard. And that doesn't mean you have to say, well, I don't think it's important for kids to learn how to read. But it just means that at some point you have to make that choice. So we'll all have to make. Are we going here or are we going there? And we have to really, really think about that. Now, a lot of parents will say, I want my children to know about God. Of course I do. But they won't give Bible study much importance in their life at all. They don't think about they don't make it a priority. Some of those things we talked about last night, like making sure your children learn about the Bible and what's in there. They say they want their kids to know about God, but they don't make their life reflect that they really do think that's important. We might say we want our children to have good morals and be pure, but what we entertain ourselves with might not be reflecting that we want them to have good morals, that we want them to know what sin, how ugly it really is, and we're letting them watch things, or we watch things that glorify sin. I mean, it's a struggle I think we all have, but we need to really think about what we're really teaching them. Now, this is a beautiful quote, and nearly every time I read this, I want to cry, but I won't cry this time. But it says this. This is from The Duties of Parents, by J.C. Ryle. I don't know, I think maybe this is a book, I'm not really sure. But the quote is beautiful. It says, train with this thought continually before your eyes. The soul of your child is the first thing to be considered. In every step that you take about them, in every plan and scheme and arrangement that concerns them, do not leave out this mighty question: how will this affect their soul? That should be the question we ask in our families, with your husband, with yourself, any decision you make. How will this affect their souls? How will this affect my soul? How will this affect my husband's soul? And when you make decisions, that's the first question. That's the necessary thing. There's nothing else on that balance that's ever going to move anything toward anything else but that eternal soul that you're looking at, that you're dealing with every day. Don't be short-sighted. Don't be short-sighted. When you're thinking about eternity, it's so easy for us to push that way down the line. We think we got plenty of time to get things right with our kids. And, if you've raised children, you know that, 18 years, it's going to go by in about 5 minutes. It feels that way. It feels like, all the time you used to think you had, it'll be gone before you know it. And your children will be leaving your home, and you'll be wondering, did we do enough? Do they know enough? Will they stay with God? And that can be crippling sometimes. So instead of seeing your 8-year-old boy who's finally making a mark on the team, right? And he loves that baseball or football or whatever it is, and you want to do everything you can because, it's good for them, right? It's good for them to be a part of a team. The athletics and sportsmanship and all that are really good. Well, it's okay, but don't just see him as an 8-year-old boy. I want you to look at him that one day he's going to be like 16. And all those decisions, all those years, are you going to have a 16-year-old who just hates the idea of going to church when he has to miss the tournament? Are you going to have a 16-year-old who would rather always hang out with the team than And I know youth groups, sometimes I know there's bad apples, so I understand that. But maybe he'd rather hang out with old guys on the team than make some relationships with some guys at the youth group that might be good for him, right? So when you're raising your children, you got to see the long term, what they're going to be like in a few years, and what decisions you're making now that are going to affect that. Same thing with maybe you don't see your 12-year-old is just looking at them playing their games, and it's no big deal. At least they're not getting into real trouble. But when you're letting that fill their time so much, and then saying, well, we don't really have time to teach them about God, but you need to see that 12-year-old one day sitting in a university biology class to where the professor's belittling, the creation and God, and you haven't really taught your child that there's some scientific proof for God, that it's not just made up and it's not just a myth or legends or fables, that there are resources out there even now for any age of children that you can be putting in front of them. And so, those are daily choices. Am I just going to let them sit in their room all day playing that because I'm busy and I'm tired? Or are we going to make some decisions about, whatever age they're at, we want them to start learning that the Bible's real. That's the battle we're facing as parents right now. It's not even, I want them to know a lot about the Bible. We have to be teaching our kids that they can trust the Bible, that it's actually real. We take that for granted. Our generations maybe some of you all are young enough that this may not be true, but nobody ever questioned whether the Bible is real when I was growing up. It's just you followed the Bible. But now you have to start with people like, is this a real deal? Is this really from God? And there's resources out there for that, for your children. So do you see what I mean? If you don't look at your 15-year-old and, they're just being silly, and we don't, as long as we can get them grown and they're out of trouble, that'll be good. But see them as a 30-year-old who just get the horrible news that their little 5-year-old boy has a brain tumor, and that they're facing possible death, years of ramifications of treatments that are going to affect him the rest of his life. And you need to understand that that's really things that happen for real people. I had a friend who said that, her, and this is the reason I use this as an example. It was her, 5 years old. They found out their son had a brain tumor, and her sister walked in, and she said, "We're praising God in the good times, and we're praising God in the bad times." It was her sister-in-law. And then I always think about her. There was a song, I don't remember the name of it, but I know one line of it is, "Say to those who are brokenhearted, do not lose your faith." Because so many people lose their faith when they have a broken heart over something. And I imagine sometimes we need to walk up to people and say, don't lose your faith. Because we know that that's a real temptation for people. The devil will work in those to say, well, maybe there's not even a God. Why is he doing this? And if there is, he doesn't love me. And they want to turn their back on God. But imagine your child not even having a faith to even try to hold on to. So we can work with that as when they're younger. We can be teaching as much as possible. We can't always be there when they're older. They have their own minds. I understand all of that. And I'm not saying that, you can do everything right and your child will be faithful, no questions asked. But I am saying you should do everything you can. And we need to be teaching our other families in the church. Do everything you can to build that faith. So the question is then, the timeline. How am I supposed to do this? I've got so many things to do already. And this sounds like a lot, a lot more research about resources, a lot more time maybe in the evening, and you already do this and that. So, how many know about Dave Ramsey? We used to listen to Dave Ramsey a lot when we were younger, and I remember him so many times talking about a line, and what he would be meaning is very often the first thing people call about their finances, of course, and he would find out a little bit like how much they make, what their house payment was, what their payments are. And the first thing he tries to do is to give them a little bit of peace. He says, well, first off, you've got enough money to buy your food, to pay for your rent or your mortgage, if they did. Sometimes, they might not. But he would assure them, you have money to keep the lights on, to pay your bills. But what you might not have money for is to pay all of your payments And then he would work with him about a plan. And part of the plan was, when the money's gone, the money's gone. And you prioritize what you're spending that money on. Your food first, your lights, and then your rent, whatever it might be. And then if you can make a payment for the credit card or for whatever, that, then obviously you do that. But there might be times where you have to just answer the phone and say, I'm not able to pay this. And he would talk to a guy. I remember him talking to a guy, and he would say, I gave him some information, I gave him some encouragement, and he called me back saying, well, it happened. I'm on the phone with the debt collector, and they're wanting me to make this payment. And I said, well, you're just below the line this month. And the guy's like, what do you mean? He said, you're below the line. We have a line. We don't pay anything. This is what we've paid. The money's gone, and we're not going to put our food money to pay for this, and we're working toward it. I'll pay you next week. You'll be above the line next month or whatever, So time is that way, right? We all have a finite amount of time. So when you think about your time, it's like a financial budget. What are we going to do first? Well, does it make sense for someone to make the payment on their boat or something and not pay for food for their family that month? No. It's the same thing here, right? You have a timeline. You have a line where the time is gone. And what you put above that line should be the most important things. Now, I'm hoping you're seeing that the most important things don't have anything to do with the physical. It's got more to do with the spiritual. And God has promised that if we put His kingdom first, He provides food. He provides clothing. And we need to trust Him that He's going to keep His word. All right, so we can try all the time to make that balance. We can make sure that it's right, but really, I don't know. The only way we're really going to have balance is to be able to really see spiritual things as just unmovable. We can't even begin to replace any of that. And then really, if we're getting that right, everything will be right. And God will provide, He will help. And none of this is to say that we should be living in cardboard boxes because we're not thinking about work, so we lose our house, lose our apartments, whatever. It's just about keeping the things in the right perspective and priorities and making sure we know what purpose we have to live and putting this world in its proper place, which is way behind eternity. So if you can do that, I think you'll have balance. I'm trying to see. I think I'm going to take about 5 more minutes here. We're going to talk about just a little bit about what you have to balance, like things that this is practical, right? Things that are going to have to be balanced. So a little bit, let's talk about, we talked about this more, we won't spend a lot of time, but balancing that relationship with your husband and your kids. Sometimes we get off balance because we're trying so hard to raise our children that we forget that we married someone we made vows to love, to honor, respect, and take care of too, So we have to keep doing that too, and we have to balance that. And it's hard sometimes, but we talked about that a little bit last night, about ways that we still need to respect our husband and make him, build him up too, and we don't want to damage our marriage because we're so focused on our children. That's part of that balance. And also we need to balance our church activities, sport activities, or other extracurricular activities, and making sure that our children are learning and that we understand that one of those things is way more important. And church activities are going to be more important in building relationships in the church. Always think it'll be the people at church that will be most beneficial to your children when they're adults, when they're struggling through life, their children are, maybe physically sick or spiritually sick. It'll be people at church and the family of God who will be the most support to your children. So why would we want to keep our children out of the church and build their relationships outside the church so much that they don't even feel like they belong to the church? I mean, we need to be doing everything we can to make them feel like they're a part of the church. And that begins at home. It begins with moms most of the time to say, why don't we see if we can take some cookies to Sister So anything you can do to mix your kids with other members of the church will help them feel like they belong there. And I know we have battles to fight as they get older. I know, and I've heard people talk about, youth groups, and maybe leave other kids out. I know that there's all kinds of that to work through, but even with that, I think you can still try to teach your children about the church and know that that is where our people are. And you can also teach them that just because someone is at church doesn't mean they're always living right, and that's a lesson in and of itself. We don't want them to think that everybody at church is bad. That's just not true. We need to see the people, the faithful people there, and let our lives be a part of the church family and create that. And I say that a family working at a place anywhere, in any kind of congregation, most of the time can make a difference if they will make that their priority. They can be the reason that there's more kids that come. They can be the reason that VBS was really good. Or they can be the reason. Even sometimes one family can do that because they think this is more important than other stuff we could be doing. And so you can be that family. So I think, one more thing. We need to balance our family time with social time. We can be busy as a family, even doing good things, and be doing good things all separately. But if you want to build a strong unit, give your children that peace that any expert is going to say will keep them out of a lot of trouble. You need to be building that strong family unit. And that starts with things that might not even seem that important, but like we mentioned, family dinners last night, that's important to your family to sit together. Let's make this a family affair, and maybe working together for the meal, but even with just little children, just bringing them up to where they know mom and dad and the rest of us kids are sitting and we're talking, we're eating the spaghetti, whatever. This is our family tradition. Even a Friday night movie night, when your kids are growing up, if you do that every night, pizza or tacos or whatever, that they'll remember that they will be more ingrained into your family if you make family traditions and rituals. We do things this way. Most children really respond to that, and it does bring you together. So, and it's all going to look different, but make the tradition start. Like, it could be anything, a game night. Like on Monday nights, we always sit down and we all love that whatever game, and we're going to play that together. That's a good start. Or just watching a good old family movie with popcorn on Friday night, if your kids are younger. So we still do that. We started that when our kids were like 4 or 5 years old. We still do that. Now it's Turner sitting there, and sometimes those movies get really old because we try not to watch bad stuff, like there's a lot out there, but we try to watch them, and some we've seen, but that's our family movie night, and it's kind of special. So anyway, I want you just to remember that keep things in balance, but usually it's like Jesus told Martha, really, it's not as hard as we want to make it. The necessary thing is the necessary thing. There's only one. So let's do that, and then everything else falls into place. I have a whole list. We talked about most of them, about products and things. If you want me to, I mentioned most of these. I'm just glancing over now, but just to keep the most important thing in your family. A lot of times what we really miss out on is that daily teaching of Bible things to our children. So I have a whole list about using the AP Apologetics Press site. Is just invaluable. And certain books I mentioned last night. So if you really want those, I can talk with you over lunch or something like that. But the main thing is to keep whatever stage your children are at, you keep teaching and you change and you try to get someone to help you if you need it, get a good resource, and just start. And usually it becomes easier the longer you do it. Okay? All right. Thanks so much. It's hard to teach without food cooking in there.
And we learned potatoes, just FYI, when I taught them.
Really. They asked at first, like the kids over there were still eating, like, is that going to bother you? And I was like, probably, since I can't think straight anyway. No, I think I would have been okay, but I was glad when they finished.
Yeah.
I was afraid I'd be up here just like, so, yeah. think, Laura, do you think that they're done? Will they just come in here?
I don't know. I sent them a message.
Okay,
But I don't know if he is.
I'll tell you what, if you're okay with it, if you want, I think this will be easier. I can read a few of these off because I know for me, you know, it's easy to say, oh yeah, that's really important, but then like you don't know what to use or where to start. But I'll tell you what I would do. First of all, I think that if they come in here, it's okay because we can still talk about this
Go ahead,
next
I'm just gonna check.
class. But there's a book. AP is like your best friend if you really want your kids to grow up believing that the Bible's real, that they can believe it's scientific, so it's not like, yeah, the Bible's real.
Abbreviation for?
Apologetics Press.
Oh.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I'm trying really hard not to say AP, but I know I've caught myself doing that. But apologeticspress.org, I think. But they have all kinds of materials for all ages, and it just teaches, and it's defending the Bible. That's what apologetics is, you know. So it defends the accuracy of the Bible. There are books like How Do You Know God Is Real that they produce. And there's one that is called How Do You Know the Bible is from God? And those two books, every kid these days ought to have read those and discuss those. You all, as a family, even it would benefit all of us, actually. Like, it's not written so, babyish, of course, that as an adult you couldn't read it and go, oh, I never knew that. I guarantee you'll learn even from that. It's written for, like upper elementary, middle school ages, but start young teaching your kids. Even one page of that every week or so would help build their knowledge. And then that whole website is full of articles and videos about the dinosaurs and what happened to them. It defends people saying the Bible is inaccurate. They'll some of the things you might think of is who did Cain marry? Like that seems so strange. Why did this, like, it's not even accurate. Well, they explain who Cain married and why that was okay and all of that. And I think as your kids get older, there are things from Answers in Genesis. It's not members of the church, so you have to be careful if they start teaching plans of salvation. Sometimes they're not always accurate, but they do have very good apologetic sources. I would just say be extremely careful with anything that's more of a spiritual nature in that, but they do have good work, and it's a bigger company too. But you could learn anything from Apologetics Press that you could from anywhere else, and they are members of the church, and they're going to teach sound doctrine about salvation and all that. So, and I think once your kids get to middle school, usually any kind of organized Bible school curriculum that they are going to go through is over, and they're talking about just random. It's been my experience, random this, random that. So step it up in middle school, making sure that their Bible knowledge doesn't just end when they're in the 4th grade, because how much would they forget? So keep pushing that. Keep making sure they understand and know about those Bible lessons and Bible story. I don't want to say stories are not real, but you know what I mean. And also, if you're dealing with that and you know that it's up to you, and it is, but find, even Apologetics Press even has a Bible school curriculum. It's free. You just download. So even going through those lessons as a family, you would learn so much. And it's embedded. All the links that they have so many times are embedded into if you download the curriculum that they put out, their Bible school curriculum. That's helpful for a family who kind of feels like, I don't really know, like our kids are the only ones at church, our Bible school curriculum probably could use some work. And I don't know what you all have here. No one said anything. I'm just saying it's been my experience that a lot of times people deal with that. And I think as your kids get older, one thing you have to do for them is making sure they understand those first principles. They need to know why we worship the way we do. They need to know that there are reasons for that. So make sure they understand and ask, people anyone about, they need to understand about just the proper ways of worship, proper ways, the plan of salvation, and all of that before they leave your home. So we don't need to neglect that. And just remember, that in Deuteronomy, one of the things you see all the time is that God always kept, he told them they need to teach their children all the time. But he said, you know, there'll come a time when you're doing what you ought to do, that your kids will ask, why are you doing this? And we should be able to tell them, you know, we should be able to say, well, we do this because God says that. And so the more you know, the more you'll be able to teach your kids. So it's a journey you can be on yourself, but also just being able to pass that along to your kids is going to make sure that they at least have heard of God and they know what the Bible teaches about this. Whether or not they choose, you know, to do that, you know, you can't control that, which is hard for moms. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in the next lesson, about things we learn about raising children, help us know more about God. All right, I just thought that'd be while we're waiting. If you want, I knew you were asking about something.